Okay, hi everybody. Like she said, my name is Robin. I have Tim here, and he's going to be talking a little later just on different fun bird updates that we have on site. But before we can do that, I'm going to go over a little bit generally about Poplar. If you guys are signed up for the birding tour next week, I will be the one with you guys. I'll be driving the boat, driving you guys around with the help of my other coworkers on site. But for today, we are here to talk, or I am here on behalf of the Port Administration, the Port of Baltimore, and we are here today to talk about the Paul S. Sarbanes Ecosystem and Restoration Project here on Poplar Island. And this project is an international model of beneficial use. So a lot of good things are being done on Poplar, and we'll just get a glimpse into that today, and then if you come out next week on the birding tour, you'll be able to see it a lot better in person. This project of this size has two main project partners who fund the majority of this project. 75% of the project is funded by the United States Army Corps of Engineers, and they are responsible for a lot of our larger construction contracts, whereas the Port of Baltimore funds the remaining 25%, and they are in charge of day-to-day operations on site. From there, they subcontract me and Tim Carney's organization, Maryland Environmental Service, to do day-to-day work on site. So I'm there every day. Tim comes visit us about twice a month to do his bird counts because he's also in charge of doing it at our other sites for Maryland Environmental Service.
Can you just give it?
Okay.
Give him a wave and he'll do it.
So when we talk about Poplar, we like to go back to the year 1847. In 1847, they did the first land survey of the island where they measured it to be 1,140 acres. 1 acre is about the size of a football field. So if you put 1,140 of them together, that would make up Poplar Island back in 1847. And a lot of people were attracted to this island. It had really a lot going on. So they decided to move to the island. So, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was a town called Valiant on the island. It was home to 100 or so people. It had 10 farms, a schoolhouse/church, a post office, a general store, a cemetery, and a sawmill. And they were lived happily on the island until about the 1920s when they were forced to move off due to erosion. This map was done by Tillman Elementary Schoolers. They actually talked to the people who used to live on the island to get this map. So it's really nice that we have this to look back on, just since we don't have a lot of artifacts of Poplar from that time period. If we go to the next slide, we'll see how the island is changing. The island, it was estimated that the people of Poplar Island were losing land due to erosion very fast. They were losing about 15 to 20 feet of land a year. So it's coming right up to their doorsteps, and that's why they had to move off the island. So this map took from the 1960s. So they had been moved off the island for about 40 years. So erosion was still happening. In the meantime, once the island was no longer found Valiant, it was owned by a couple different people. It was owned by the Democratic National Party. It was owned by the Smithsonian. It was owned by a couple of families, and it was owned by a group of lawyers. That leads us to our next slide. And our next slide is the next year we're going to focus on, which is 1993. In 1993 is the next year we focus on is because that's when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers did their second land survey, to where they measured it to be less than 5 acres. As you can see in this photo, there isn't really much going on. So if we click the button, we're going to see this nice transition here that shows us our 4 remaining islands. So those less than 5 acres weren't even one continuous tract, rather split between 4 remnant islands, which we see right here. And we're still on the island today. With our construction, we had just built around them. So if you come to Poplar Island next week, if you just remind me, I'll point them out as we go along. But we have these 1, 2, 3, 4 islands that were Poplar Island. And they estimated by the year 2000, if further intervention wasn't done, Poplar Island would be washed away forever. But we were able to find a solution, and that solution came from our port city in Maryland, Baltimore. Baltimore is a huge economic driver for not only the state of Maryland, but the nation as a whole. And in order to remain competitive, we need to be able to bring in the biggest cargo ships to get those nice imports and exports. But in order to do that, we have to make sure that those cargo ships go effectively through the Chesapeake Bay. Now, on average, the Chesapeake Bay is about 21 feet deep, and those cargo ships need about 50 feet of clearance to safely get through. So we need to do this process called dredging. Now, in our next slide, we're going to watch a video that explains that. Just kidding. This is what Poplar Island looks like today. I guess I still have that later baby brain going on. But this is what Poplar Island looks like today. So we're a lot more than with the vanished away. We've been working since 1998 to rebuild this island, so we're about 25 years strong, and we still have a lot of work left to do. But like I was mentioning, we found the solution through the Port of Baltimore shipping channels through their dredged material. And if I'm correct, the next slide should be why we need to dredge.
Over time, wind, tides, and runoff cause sediments to accumulate, which could block shipping channels. The process of periodically clearing the material from shipping channels is referred to as maintenance dredging. To maintain the channel's proper depth, a clamshell bucket and crane barge are used to remove sediment and place it in a flat-bottomed scow, which is then towed away to a containment facility. In order to protect the marine environment, maintenance dredging typically takes place in fall and winter. Approximately 5 million cubic yards are cleared from the Chesapeake Bay channels each year. Of that, 1.5 million cubic yards are removed from the Baltimore harbor alone.
So if we head on to the next slide, the dredging is a very important of our project. And Poplar Island was partially created in support of keeping the Port of Baltimore operations open. Like that video was mentioning, we need somewhere to put that dredged material, and Poplar Island is one of the places how we do that to beneficial use. But the Port of Baltimore, like I said, is not only an important economic driver for the state of Maryland, but as a nation as a whole. And this sheet gives a good overview of what the Port of Baltimore does for us. So the Port of Baltimore generates 37,300 direct, induced, and indirect jobs, over 100,000 related jobs in the state of Maryland, almost 140,000 jobs related to port activities, $3.3 billion in wages and salaries annually, and $395 million in state and local taxes revenues annually. We're ninth ninth in foreign cargo value. We're over 10 million tons of cargo passed through the port in 2022. Baltimore ranks 11th in foreign cargo tonnage. We're number 1 in small cars and trucks. We have railroads, or we like to call them railroads because they roll on and they roll off of our barges. We're also number 1 in the import of sugar and gypsum. If you guys happen to ever been in the Inner Harbor before, you guys would have seen the Baltimore, or the Domino Sugar Factory in Baltimore, and sometimes if you're even lucky, you can see them take it right off the cargo ship themselves. And then we're number 2 in the export of coal. We can't be number 1 in everything. If we head to the next slide. So when we were starting construction of Poplar in 1998, we looked at it like a puzzle. And when you start a puzzle, most people like to start with the edges first. So that's exactly what we did. We built the perimeter of the island using this armor stone. This armor stone is a special type of granite, which is very durable. It can weigh up anywhere from 200 to 4,000 pounds. We go to the next transition. It was one guy's job to strategically place every single rock and make sure its quality check to meet our standards. As you guys can imagine, Poplar Island is very highly engineered, so everything with the island had a very specific purpose and was very thought out. So the next thing we do is once we have our perimeter, we break it into smaller manageable pieces called cells. So our island is divided up into cells. It's a lot easier to manage 1,715 acres if it's split up into a lot more manageable pieces. So like the video was talking about, once we have our foundation of the perimeter of the cells, we're able to start receiving the dredge material. The dredge material comes from where there's an imaginary line in the Baltimore Harbor called the North Point Rock Point Line. Anything below that gets cut into poplar. Like the video was explaining, we have this clamshell bucket that scoops that dredge material up, places it on a flat bottom boat called a scow, and then gets cut to poplar, which we see here. If we go to the next slide, once it gets to the island, it is then met with this special machine called an unloader. If you press play on the video, we'll be able to see that the dredge material is then mixed with 90% water and 10% dredge material. We do this because it's easier to hydraulically pump it onto the island rather than mechanically. It saves us a lot of time and money, and everybody likes to save a little bit of time and money. So once we mix it in with that slurry, that 90% water, the 10% dredge material, we are able to start pumping it onto the island, which we will see in our next slide. And if you press play on that video, we can see it being hydraulically pumped into the cell. Now, Poplar being the huge project it is, we have this massive timeline detailing every year what needs to be done in that specific year. So depending on what part of the timeline we're in, it'll tell us exactly where we need to hydraulically pump that dredge material into the cells. Right now on Poplar Island, we are actually undergoing our inflow season, despite it not being winter time, just because we still need to catch up from COVID. So right now they are working hard on the island, probably as we speak, inflowing this dredge material exactly like we see here. So once that dredge material is in the cell, like I was telling you guys, it is 90% water, 10% dredge material. But after we have it hydraulically pumped in the cell, we no longer need that water anymore. So our main job is to get that water out of the cell. And we do that through a couple ways. When the cell is undergoing dewatering, it's called crust management. And as you can see here, the land is very crusty. We call it crust management because it forms this thin little layer of crust when it's drying. And we want our dredge material to be as dry as possible before adding another layer of dredge material. This helps us optimize how much dredge material we can get. Another way we optimize our placement capacity is we dig these trenches around the cell, and it also helps to percolate water out of the cell. I always like to compare it to Smith Island cake. We're continuously adding the dredge material in layer by layer, but for a cake not to fall over, we want to make sure it is dry as possible before we add another layer in, and that's exactly what we're doing here on Poplar. So if you go to the next slide,
Where's the frosting?
the frosting's not there yet. I always like to say the frosting's the habitat planning, which we'll get to in a minute. But since that dredge material takes such a long time to fill in, so for most of our soils, we're not completely there yet. But we have been able to complete over 372 acres of woodland habitat so far, and we're getting closer each day, like I said. So our project, we have 68 million cubic yards of capacity. Right now, we are at 40 million cubic yards. Every year, we get about 2 million cubic yards of dredge material into Poplar. So this project started in 1998, and we are slated to get our last inflow of dredge material on about the 2030s. So this is the 30+ years of capacity that we're able to get that dredge material. And then the project is slated to be done around the 2044 mark, but we'll just have to see how that goes in the meantime. If we go to our next slide, one of our main goals of Poplar Island is to restore remote island habitat within the mid-Chesapeake Bay. Our first map that we see here is our initial footprint. Originally, we wanted the island to be its historical size of 1,104 acres. Like we were mentioning before, the Port of Baltimore needs somewhere to put all that dredge material, and Poplar is one of the sites that it goes to. Since the Port of Baltimore needs a 20-year plan of where that dredge material is going to go, we are able to do some further research to prove that the island was much larger in its history. And that's why we were able to add on this 575-acre expansion. On Poplar, we have 3 different types of habitat. We have our wetland habitats, which are the light green right here. We have our upland habitats, which are our hills with the green lines in it. And then we have our open water embayment, which is the semi-protected water habitat, and that is dedicated for our fish. So we can head to the next slide. So once the dredge material is dried out, here comes the icing to the top of our cake we were talking about. We are then starting to add our habitat. So this is cell 1C, and we're going to just take a little journey and watching how this grows. So every individual, or every plant that we plant on Poplar Island is individually hand planted. Depending where we are in the project timeline, we'll either subcontract it out to different groups to do it for us. Sometimes we have volunteers with the National Aquarium. It really depends where we are in our timeline. So this cell we're seeing right here, every plant plug is individually hand planted, and this helps us a lot with control. As you can imagine, when we're planting habitat, we also have to keep in mind for stuff to go wrong. So we plant every plant plug individually to help us with that control. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see it in May, and it's starting to grow in a little bit, just like your stubble. If we go to the next slide, we'll see it's starting to fill in quite nicely, get that nice green color. If we go to the next slide, it's getting more lush, and this is only in July. As we go to our next slide, looking even better. And our next slide, we're starting to see the season change, the different plants come up. And again, even looking better. November, and then this is what it looks like today. So it has filled in quite nicely. Usually our habitat only takes a couple months for it to really take shape. So we have all these nice wetland grasses right here. We also have this habitat island with a bunch of woody shrubs. The trees you can kind of see right there are our volunteer species. So we did not plant them themselves. They actually through seed dispersal, they get to do themselves, and those are our cottonwood trees. So I'm done with my portion of the talk. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Tim Carney. Tim Carney does all of our bird censuses on site, and he'll be able to share what.
Yeah, one question.
Oh, do you have any questions for me first before we get into birds? Yeah.
Yes, I know when they had that tanker that got stuck there, they had to dredge it out. They ordered over Poplar Island, dredge material. How much did that add to the island?
That is a great question. So I just started in September. We did get dredge material from the Everford to get it unstuck. I know it is in our expansion though, but I don't know how much capacity we got from that. What?
Which one?
We will have to get back to you on that one. If you come to the tour next week, we totally got you.
I want to know what type of plants you're planting, because that's salty water.
So in our wetland habitat, we have a ratio that we have to meet. We're 80% high marsh to 20% low marsh. So we're dominantly Spartina, a dominated marsh. We have our Spartina ultimiflora, which is our low marsh, and our Spartina vatans, which is our high marsh. We do have quite a mixture of volunteer species that just naturally grow themselves. And we do, on our upland cells at the moment, we do have a native pollinator mix of different native plants. When we start planting our almond cells, in about the first cell, our test lot is expected to be done in 2027. We're going to be planting trees, meadows, and scrub shrubs in our almond cells, which are going to be acted more as hills than our lawn cells. But those take a lot longer to fill out, just because we are keep adding in that dredge material.
What are you doing to control invasive species?
So she asked, what are we doing to control invasive species? So that's a great question. We do have an environmental team on site, and they do a really good job about patrolling the island each and every day, and really just taking a look about what's growing in our cells. They have these wonderful maps, plenty of maps that they do to monitor and track where the invasives are growing, and then they can treat them accordingly. With our invasives rules, there is a lot of things that go on. They have to keep in mind the weather, what time of year they're spraying it. So it's very regulated by the Maryland Department of Environment. But they are very aggressive in spraying. They were spraying when I left today, and then most likely probably spraying more full thistle today.
Do you do anything to bring like frogs or animal life?
Okay, so he asked, do we bring anything to bring frogs or any wildlife? And the answer is no. Everything that has come to Poplar Island has came on its own. We do have a good population of mammals. We have a population of 48 white-tailed deer on site. We also have muskrats, our more aqueous animals that we are pretty notable. We have some otters. Sometimes we see dolphins, also Poplar. We also have quite a good snake population on site. We have common water snakes, we have black cat snakes, we have king snakes, we have a couple types of frog, we have a green tree frog, we have our Fowler's toad. But everything we have been seen on site, including the birds, have come naturally to Poplar. So that's why every day is pretty exciting.
How did they get there?
Which ones?
Like snakes and deer
So the deer actually swim. The deer eat grasses, which makes them kind of gassy, and that gassiness helps them float across the water. The backs have their own personal entertainment. But also during low tide, they are able to walk over from the eastern shore, which is about only 1 to 2 miles away. The birds obviously fly. The snakes and the frogs, I'm not too sure about that. I would have to look more into that, but we do have a thriving population of those as well.
I wonder if it's like having a seed bank where some of that comes up once it's disturbed.
This or
Yeah, you
so hold on or
Yeah, you can
it's
just.
my
leave
first
it.
time all these presentations I've never had a mic.
You can leave it down and it'll pick that.
Okay, so on the maps that Bronwyn showed earlier of the erosion over time, there's always that one stationary darker green island, that's Coach's Island, and that's mostly mature pine trees. That's always been there. So we think that a bunch of things just kind of came right over. It's not a very far distance, and at low tide you could walk right over to it. But we never lost Coach's Island, and that has a little bit of everything on it. And I also heard one year, I think the polar vortex year, the real deep freeze, it drove all the way to Tillman, and the foxes just walked over. So that's another way it's deep freeze, animals really needing to find food. They'll wander far and wide. And one year we had red fox on the island. So,
Yeah, it keeps us on our toes for sure.
and ever forward was 210,000 cubic yards. I found the article that cites it.
So there.
There's one article with an actual number on the sun.
So perhaps you could help out then with, if anyone has questions while Tim is doing his presentation, and just hand them my.
Yeah, I can do that. I'm gonna have to run out real quick just because we do a turtle program with school kids. I have to run out to transfer the turtles, but as soon as I get back, I would love to help Tim answer all your guys' department questions.
Sure. So, okay. Well, thank you for having me. I always like to give this talk because I know that if you're here, you're at least semi-interested, so I don't feel it's bad rambling about other stuff like we do with non-burning family and friends. But I'm Tim. I've been with MES since around Halloween 2010, and through a good chain of coincidences, I wound up doing the bird surveys at work. So even when I started at MES, I didn't even know that we did bird surveys. And when I moved into the dredging division, I knew that someone did a bird survey once or twice a month. Had no idea it would actually come to me. So I've been birding for over 30 years. It was a casual hobby until I started with MES, and then just seeing all the habitat we've restored and the members of the birding community that come to our sites. I would be sitting in my office and somebody would run in and say, "Oh, I found this, come see it." And I would run, see it, and started keeping like more detailed list, and then working on my shorebird IDs. And then when the gentleman who did the poplar bird surveys retired, they just said, it's yours, just start if you want it. So, and then since then, I've also acquired the Cox Creek, Masonville Cove, and Hardmiller Island bird surveys up in the Baltimore area. So 4 sites twice a month, so 8 days a month I get paid to go birding, which is fantastic. And then we've also really amped up our birding tours at the harbor sites. So I don't do the birding tours on Poplar, but we've been doing a lot more at Cox Creek and Hardmiller in particular. So now it's up to about 11 or 12 days a month that I get paid to go birding when I take the groups out and kind of take them into the restricted areas that we don't normally let the public go, which have some unique birds, but that's a whole different presentation. So I guess we can start. Next slide. So with Poplar, as Bronwyn was saying, we do like a 20% high marsh, 80% low marsh in the wetland cells, but within those cells, we have specific features for birds. So it's not just planting the Spartina grasses and letting it grow, but some of the cells, this is actually, there's a habitat island surrounded by a moat, so the mammalian predators can't get out to the birds that are nesting on there. So we have to do 16 acres split amongst 1 to 4 islands, and I think we settled on 3 or 4. And of that, we decided to do 8 of those acres would be sparsely vegetated with like mostly sand and shell and some like small bits of grass, but we actually harvest that so it doesn't grow into like a meadow, because some of the birds, like the terns, want to nest on the gravel. And then the other ones are shrub covered for the herons, egrets, ibis that nest in those dense heronries. Some people call it a rookery, we call it a heronry in those shrubs. We also have hummocks, which are like a rise in the marsh that doesn't get inundated at high tide. We designed them for American black ducks, and we found that the American black ducks nest around them, but not on them. So didn't totally work, but they're close. But then we did find some birds nesting on them that we had no idea would even be there, which is another slide. Not yet though. We have marshes we have ponds in the high marsh, which attract a different fish community, so some different birds there. And then mudflats at low tide, the channels in the cells, like all these channels, as the tide recedes and the mud is exposed, the shorebirds come out there to feed on the little bugs, benthic things in the mud. So within the main habitats are these sub-features for specific types of birds. Next slide. I occasionally get asked why I get paid to count birds. I think some people are just kind of confused about like why that matters, but it's a really expensive project that took a lot of planning and work, and not just that, but the amount of effort to really make these thriving habitats, like to not just plan it and let it go, but we actually maintain it, like Bronwyn said, with the invasive control. The birds that are using it are a good metric of how well it's working. So we can say with the counts, like, this was an undeveloped cell 3 years ago, then we planted it, this species moved in last year, and now this year they're breeding. So, it went from none to presence to breeding. And then we can also use it, Poplar is an anomaly. We don't have a lot of mud flats in Maryland. It's not like the Delaware Shore, like Bombay Hook, big open mud flat. So the undeveloped dredge cells are a mud flat. So all those shorebirds, we don't normally see that in Maryland in those big concentrations, but we can kind of determine like species composition and migration just based on what's using poplar that we wouldn't otherwise see in Maryland. And we also use the bird counts for outreach. I can say, hey, birding community, we found this rare bird on a survey. You should come see it. And then while you're here, we can tell you what we do. And, that's a little bit easier at the public sites up in the harbor where people can drive to them. I can say, Masonville's open to the public 6 days a week. I can say, I found one of these on my survey. You should come see it. With the island sites, it's a little bit harder, but we have done some emergency bird tours where somebody found some crazy, unexpected rare bird, and within 24 hours, we pulled together enough resources to bring 2 boatloads of people out to see it, and then it was gone and never again seen in Maryland. We did that in Park Miller with a snowy plover. We've done it with snowy owls some years. But, we use the birds to kind of bring people to us and also not to show them the birds, but also kind of answer questions about what we're doing. Because a lot of construction equipment out in the bay, not everybody knows what's going on, but you can see it up close if you come out with the tours. So next slide. This is Jan Reese. I don't know if anybody knows him. He's kind of like a Talbot County legend. Like he's been doing bird surveys for decades, since before bird surveys were really a thing. He would go out to all the remote islands in the bay and do nesting bird surveys. He's done point counts of migration, and he was the most obvious pick. When we started doing the surveys out in Poplar 2002, he retired in October 2013, which is when it went to me. So it'll be about 10 years next month that I've been out there. And we cover the whole site. Some people do point counts or transects, but Jan and I we start and we look at every bird that we can find. Sometimes we couldn't go everywhere because of construction. I don't like to run statistics on these counts because it might look like a huge drop one day, but that's just because I wasn't allowed up at the expansion. Not a decrease in birds, just couldn't see the ones that were there. So it's more about usage, not so much the statistics, but just usage. Like, all right, well, I was able to see all these cells, and here's what I found in them. Here's what they were doing. I found way more of these than expected, and I didn't find any of these, and I don't know why. So, we're really kind of analyzing it from a usage perspective. Next slide. We also have some partners, USGS, US Fish and Wildlife. They do some more species-specific monitoring out there. So where Jan and I would count the whole island, they're going into just the common tern colony, and they're counting nests. And they walk around and they put a little flag next to each nest. And the birds don't seem to mind the flag. They mind the people walking through, but then they come right back because they're not going to abandon their nests. And they also do nest surveys in the heron rookery where they will actually go into the shrubs and count nests. And they have a chart of how to identify a bird by its nest, which I need to learn that one. That's new to me. And they also they don't do the cormorants now. They used to. They also do tern banding out there. So the tern nestlings that are, tiny little fuzzballs that can't fly, they'll put a little band on the leg, and then that's another slide. I'm getting ahead of myself, but there's a point to it. And then we also have some really unusual breeding birds. Like if you're a Maryland birder, or if you're a Talbot County birder, American oyster catcher doesn't breed anywhere else in the county. Neither does seaside sparrow. Neither does blackneck still, and northern shovelers don't breed anywhere else in the state. But these are all breeding on poplar, or have been. We haven't had oyster catchers for a few years. I think we got too big. So that's just another unusual occurrence that we're documenting. So they used to nest out there. and then the island kept expanding, and then we don't have them, but now we've got this one instead. So it's really interesting to see the changes over time. Next slide. Also some really interesting wintering birds and transient birds. If it's going to be one of those big snowy owl years where they're everywhere, poplar and acetate get them first. So if we see a snowy owl in November, we kind of know that it's gonna happen. Last winter was not one. The winter before that was kind of one, but then there were those years where they just seemed to be everywhere. They were at the airports, they were on a high-rise in Baltimore City, and poplar and acetate are kind of the indicators for them. I had we'll just call it an opportunity, I'll stay positive. Opportunity to count almost 25,000 ducks in one day. I like counting birds. I don't love counting lots of birds that are moving around. Because I like to really focus on them and get accurate counts and identify them. But when there are almost 25,000, it's chaos in a good way, but there's really not a good way to leave feeling like you got it completely right. Especially with eagles and falcons flushing everything, birds moving around. But we're gonna estimate, that was a low estimate. I took pictures left to right of a 100-acre cell and counted on my computer. And estimated, and that's one of the cells, just everything was in the bottom cell on Poplar. I think that maybe some of their shallow areas inland froze, and Poplar, that lower cell didn't freeze, and it was the only open brackish water, not the deep bay water. So all the ducks skinned Poplar. We've never had a count like that since. That was the really cold winter. Lots of shorebirds, the little brown things that run around. I'm sure a lot of people know killdeer. Think 30 to 40 variations on killdeer. And then we also have American bittern, black-crowned night heron in the lower picture, and short-eared owls that overwinter in the marshes on the island. I don't know of any other reliable spots in the county where they overwinter, but they're just right there on Poplar. Next slide. So through all of this monitoring since 2002 that Jan and I have done, the official site list is at 257 species as of 2 weeks ago, but then I found another one last week that's a very difficult ID. You need to hear it, and it wasn't calling. But I got a lot of pictures, and I'm hoping somebody can see something that I'm not, so we can bump it up. But 248 of those have been on the island itself. 9 more are either we've heard them on Coach's Island, or they've been out in the bay around the island, but not necessarily on the island itself. We confirmed 34 species as breeding this year. I've got about 12 or 13 more where we didn't find a nest, but a pair of birds in the same tree every day, kind of they're breeding, we just didn't confirm. And since 2002, we've confirmed 44 species breeding on the island. Next slide. We've also gotten some all-time Maryland high counts of birds on the island. When I started birding 4 black-necked stilts, these really long leggy birds with the big long pink legs. When I started birding, if you saw 4 of them, it was a high count. We counted 160 on the island in July. They breed everywhere. The main breeding areas are Elliott Island, down in Dorchester, and Deal Island in Somerset, and sometimes if you're really lucky, you might see 10 or 12. But we counted 160 in one day, and most of them were young birds that hatched on the island. Short-eared owl, you'll see 1 or 2 at a time. I counted 29 in one spot on December 3rd, 2020. Short-eared owl's a weird one. It's not my favorite method of counting birds, but I do a barge walk. We've got these abandoned barges that were out on the island, and instead of moving them, they just left them here to see what would happen with them. And then we have birds that overwinter in them, and along them they block the wind. So I walk and clap and an owl pops up, 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 and I feel really bad bothering them, but the only way for me to count them, they're owls that like roost and sleep in tall grass, like I won't see them at all. So the only way to count them is to do a flush count. And they circle and they bark at me. These owls, they don't move, they bark. And then they go right behind me and they go right back down in the grass. And then it repeats when I walk back out. But so then I leave and they're good for 2 weeks and no one bothers them until I come back again and do a count. So next slide.
Do these birds come back every year?
The same individual birds, yes and no, depending on if they're banded or not, and we can tell. But as far as the other birds, I don't know if it's the same individuals, but the species, like without fail, there will be short-eared owls in large every winter.
Do the banded ones come back?
The banded tern, we band the terns, and we actually have a guy that sits there in a lawn chair with a scope and just tries to read tern bands.
Oh, gosh.
And he'll log what he sees and says, oh, we banded that one out here 5 years ago. So it's back. We'll be there soon. But yeah, they do come back. If we can read the band, then we can kind of prove like what's coming back.
Microchipping some now?
Not at Poplar yet. I've heard that. I think we tried radio transmitters, which I think is another way. I've had so many new ones in, but yeah.
You said, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. Do you banding up there too?
I don't, but we do have a tern banding project where the common terns and the least terns, USGS and Fish and Wildlife bans the chicks, or the nestlings, and then they do, it's called a mark site where they will just sit there and scope terns sitting in the sand or wherever and try to read the band number. So we do. In time, I think it would be great to ban some more birds out there. It's also hard to catch birds. I mean, the mist nets for the little birds are one thing, but like herons and stuff, you know, I don't. There are 2 other ones that we are banding as of this year, which I'm really excited about. They're coming. So another thing that just happened that no one really expected. We have 3 duck species that are either not breeding anywhere else in Maryland but Poplar, or they're breeding at one other spot and Poplar. So northern shovelers, these winter all over the place. If you can find some like shallow freshwater that's kind of, I don't want to say gross, but I mean, shovelers are like on sewage lagoons and like stagnant, swampy water. If they can find that in the winter, they're all over the state. But as far as breeding, they want really healthy Spartina marsh with wetlands. And out of nowhere in 2019, we found a shoveler nest. And now we're up to about 5 or 10 pairs on Poplar. And we're doing the breeding bird atlas, and this is year 4 of 5. So birders have been scouring the entire state of Maryland for breeding birds, and we cannot find any more shovelers, just on Poplar. Blue-winged teal, they bred last summer. That was the only one last year. We did not find a nest this year, but somebody found a nest in Frederick County at a farm pond of all places, which is great, but kind of took away my only breeding spot in the state for me, but that's okay. And then Gadwall down at the bottom started breeding in 2021. Again, we're up to about 5 or 10 pairs all across the site. And the only other nest that people found recently was on Deal Island. And prior to the shoveler in 2019, I think the only shoveler nest was Blackwater in the 80s, like one nest in 85. So, I mean, these birds don't breed in Maryland. They breed in like prairie potholes or semi-tundra, but now they're just breeding on Poplar because the habitat's healthy. Also, there might be some that we don't know about. Poplar's a little bit more accessible than some of those remote marshes, but as of now, these are the only known breeders of these 3 species, aside from 2 exceptions. Next slide. We also have the heronry. So this is an island in the cell. It's small trees, large shrubs, and this was really interesting. They all nested on this island over here in this cell, Then COVID hit and Fish and Wildlife couldn't come out and control the cormorants because if the cormorants get there first, they kill all the trees. So Fish and Wildlife has deterrent methods to keep the cormorants away and let the herons and egrets come. So then COVID hit, cormorants came, destroyed the 3D island. It was bare by the end of the summer. But instead of leaving, they moved into the shrubs along the road. And then the year after that, they moved onto a different island and the numbers exploded. So these are nests. So 369 egret nests. So that's multiply that by 2 for the parents. And then each pair has, 3 to 5 young. That's a pretty big number. These are the 2022 numbers. In parentheses of 2021, we don't have 23 finalized yet, but they're about the same. Except Little Blue and Straggler Heron, I think, went off. So, again, I'm not going in there, but we have a team that does go in there to actually count the nests. But I do count what I can see from the outside. Next slide.
Quick question.
Sure.
Cormorants.
Yeah.
Never saw them here in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
They were all over New England.
Yeah.
And now they're here. And
Everywhere.
I don't understand because in New England, they hang out on rocks to dry their wings, and we don't seem to have the rocky shoreline, but they've adapted.
Everywhere. Yep. They were hunted pretty heavily, and it was bad. They were plummeting in numbers. I heard that their oily plumage, they would actually use it for some kind of oil extract. But anyway, they did all these protections to save all the cormorants, and now they're everywhere. They're a nuisance in some places because they rebounded so well. But they have adapted anywhere with fish, and you might not see them in certain areas, but in Baltimore, Fort Carroll, that old
Right.
battery, that's a rookery for them. So they're everywhere on that island. And then during the day, they expand and they feed in all the channels. And then they just disperse and they're gone. But they've really adapted. And I see them following boats a lot, and I see them anywhere people are fishing. Because I think people actually feed them the discarded scraps, so they've learned where to go. But they will take over owl and poplar if the deterrents aren't.
What do they do that destroys the trees?
Their poop is really acidic.
Oh.
It's called denuding. So if they poop on the leaves, it denudes the trees, and then
Without leaves, it dies.
so we went from fully lush shrub island to bare branches in a season because the cormorants just got there, and then that's just kind of.
What did they do to protect that?
They do a lot of things, but they have their methods to keep the cormorants away. But cormorants are they're native, they're protected to a point. We do want them there, but we also want species that are more threatened to have a chance. And if the cormorants get there first, then nothing has a chance. So I don't make those decisions, I just count the birds, but I do know that they have their methods for making sure that herring gulls and cormorants don't take over the heron and tern colonies. So speaking of tern colonies, common tern, least tern, terns are slightly better gulls. They're very related, but they're not scavengers, they're not, I don't know, they're a little more graceful, they only eat fish. They might be more aggressive. The terns are pretty aggressive. They'll fly right at you and then go straight up and then poop. So they have right at you and poop and then
Trying to
poop.
destroy you.
The team that goes out there to count the nets, I'm I don't know how they're not just covered all day, every day. But yeah, they go right at you and they scream and then they go straight up. Common terns are state endangered breeders and least terns are state threatened breeders. We have multiple colonies of both. I'm pretty sure we still have the largest common tern colony. I know they're doing a lot of work down in Ocean City on some of the floating barges with the common tern colonies, the coastal based program. They might have us beat the numbers. I don't know, but still hundreds of common terns and least terns. 2022 numbers again, 440 common tern pairs and 431 least-term pairs. So 2 adults, 3 to 5 chicks, lots of birds. Here's one of the bands. So if you can see the bird close enough, sometimes you can drive right next to them and they won't fly away. Otherwise, you need to scope it. If you can read that 3 character code, you can tell which individual bird that is. And they do track that over time. And one of our common terns that was banned in, I want to say 2015, they found in Aruba in 2021. So that's 1,800 plus miles that one of our birds went from Poplar at least down to Aruba, possibly kept going, because I know they winter farther in South America, but it was one of our birds. I think it was in Asia. One of the local papers picked it up. So that's kind of how we're tracking the birds. Most of the time we just track the birds that return each year, but I found poplar birds on Park Miller. I found Virginia Bay Bridge tunnel birds on Poplar. And I just emailed the bird banding people and they tell me where it was banded and when. Next slide, please. But I talked earlier about the shorebirds, the little variations on killdeer, and this is kind of what draws the birding community out, because like I said, we don't have a lot of shorebird areas in Maryland where you can get up close and study these really minute details. So the birding tours, we like to take them to the shorebird stops and let them really look at the birds up close. So American golden plover, Hudsonian godwit, semi-palmated plover, long-billed dowager, plover, sandpiper, they're all under the shorebird umbrella. These are some of the more striking birds, but next slide. You normally get something like this, where there's hundreds, if not thousands of them, and they're like this big, and they are all moving around, and it's very hot. They're warm weather birds here, and the bugs are biting you, and you have to count all of them and identify them, and it's just.
So remember to bring your binoculars.
Yeah, it's a challenge to do shorebird ID. But once you get the hang of it, it's really rewarding to just kind of know this one feeds like a sewing machine, and then this one swishes back and forth, and this one, the wings go past the tail, and this one they don't, and this one, when it bends over, it's got like a humpback, and the one that looks like it doesn't. And you can actually use kind of structure and behavior to parse out from all these little brown dots, like what's what. And then I quickly learned the benefit of counting by 10s and then 20s and then 50s, rather than trying to count every individual bird with my clicker. It's a lot better to do like a count by 10s before something flushes all of them. I mean, if a peregrine falcon flies over mid-count, it's over, like the birds fly away. Sometimes they keep going down the bay. So, next slide. So these are 2 different species, but just to show you some of the differences, the stilt sandpiper has a little bit of a droop on the bill, and the lesser yellowlegs don't, and their legs are slightly brighter yellow. This one's more of like a greenish yellow. Completely different species, different migration routes, different feeding habits. That's how close you have to be to see them, but these are different species. Next slide.
I have a question.
Oh,
You said the sandpiper, and what was the other species?
lesser yellowlegs, which is also a sandpiper. So still sandpiper. These are, to me, pretty different. The one on the right is a lot taller. It's paler and it's got a longer bill, but for some reason people think this is the same species. But here, this is an eastern willet. That's a western willet. Right now, they're subspecies. I'm waiting for them to be split into 2 different species. They breed and migrate in completely different ways. Eastern breeds all over Poplar, gone by the end of July. Western willet shows up in July as a migrant. So why these aren't different species, I don't know. I think soon someone might just decide we're going to split them. But next slide.
Question, you mentioned the killdeer.
Yep.
As a shorebird, I've always seen it in gravel a couple miles inland.
Most of them are mud birds. Why they're called shorebirds, I don't know.
Okay.
But most of them like mud, or only a few of them are actually like on the beach.
Okay. Because I've seen them like in gravel beds on the edge of farms and stuff.
Yeah, they'll nest in the middle of the road. We have to flag them at work because it's all gravel roads and the killdeer plops down and we have to spray paint a circle around it and put a cone and drive around this killdeer, but they want to be on the gravel. So, 3 different ones here. This one is a little bit bigger and has longer wings. That's a white rump sandpiper. Most of the others are semi-palmated sandpipers. If you can barely see it, the wings and the tail are the same length, but here the wings cross over and go past the tail. And then the pectoral sandpipers, 1, 2, 3, have yellow legs. That's it. The streaking's a little bit denser here on the chest. Not as much streaking at all, some streaking. But to see them up close, you can kind of make sense of the differences, but from a distance, a little more difficult. And the birders love this stuff. Like these are, a lot of times these are all new birds for their list. They've never seen one before. And to actually get to see it up close and really study it is, just the nerdy scientist in us really comes out with shorebirds. Next slide. And then this all gray bird, and then these brighter orange birds. These are the same species. That's just one in winter plumage. These are in summer plumage. So the 3 birds before this looked almost the same and were different species. These look completely different, but these are just different stages of mold and the same species. So there are so many facets of shorebird ID to study that you just need to see the birds up close. Next slide.
What?
Oh,
What is that?
short-billed dowager, which should be there next week. Moving on from shorebirds to some of the more unusual. How am I on time?
You're fine, you have to know.
Oh, okay. All right. I want to make sure we have time for questions. Moving on from shorebirds, we're going to do some rare birds. Satin skull. This is a tundra breeder that winters at sea. They just float and they pick at the plankton and small fish and whatever they need to do. And when they migrate south, sometimes they turn up inland. So I just happened to connect with one. It just looks like a normal gull until it flies and the wings are half white, half black. And my coworker saw it, she said it looked like a really cool bat flying around. And it stood out from the other birds. And we had a birding tour that day. I got to show it to them. Never again. It was there for maybe 2 weeks. Never again. It just stayed fed and off it went. I think there were maybe 12 records for Maryland ever. But we got to walk right up to one on top of it. So, next slide. Piping plover. These are the Assateague birds where they get fenced off and protected. 2 different populations. There's a Great Lakes population of breeders, and then there's the Atlantic coast breeders. So even though Poplar's near Ocean City, this is a Great Lakes bird. This was in July, and you can see the bands. So it had a metal band with a code, and a blue plastic band on the right leg. Left leg had a black band with an orange code and a yellow plastic band. So the Great Lakes plover researchers, each bird gets a different combination. You don't even need to read the code. Just the colors on what color on what leg tells you what bird it is. So they named it Little Cooper, the plover, piping plover people. They banded it as a chick in Michigan in 2012. Someone found it in Florida in 2018. And every year it goes up to Ontario to breed. And it started producing chicks. It produced 4 in 2019. So just the bands, we can tell this bird, born in Michigan, and then it migrates up and down the coast, breeds in Ontario, winters in Florida, stops at Poplar along the way. So where were you? July 25th, 2019, on Poplar. And then I had another one this past April, and the plover people never emailed me back. I want to know where my bird's from, but it was not this bird. So maybe I have to call them if they aren't going to email me. But I want to know where the second bird came from. Next slide. Some other banded birds. Common terns. There are bands on both legs. This one kept harassing a Caspian tern. I don't know what it was doing. I think it was actually trying to preen it, but the Caspian tern wasn't having it. These are on Park Miller Island. But one of them was banded on Poplar, and the other was banded in New Jersey in completely different years, but I found them together on Park Miller. So again, just an example of the banding. and an example of one of our birds on Poplar turning up somewhere else and tracking it. Excellent. This was one of my recent favorite ones. I said we track all the birds that breed on site. We're up to 44. We had Carolina wrens that'll breed anywhere. They're probably in everybody's garden. They showed up on Poplar about 5 years ago, and I could not find a nest. And finally, last June 22, I found one nesting in one of our open sheds on site, and a second bird flew up into this big piece of equipment with nesting material, and I got up there to look for the second Carolina wren nest, and next slide, found a barn owl nest instead. So the Carolina wren flew in the bottom of this big excavator thing, and I climbed up to look for the nest, and there's a barn owl on eggs in the seat. So this is the seat compartment, like below, like the seat's up here, and then there's this square pit. And I had to see the egg at first. I didn't know if it was sick or what, so we found like a big shovel and just used like the wooden handle end and just like gently nudged her. She lifted up, we saw an egg, we left. And I said, there's a barn owl in the Marsh Master, and they said, well, we're gonna drive that tomorrow. And I said, no, barn owl. We need to, this is a state threatened breeding, state endangered, it's listed. It's got some kind of state protections as a breeding species. Never happened on Poplar before. We never found a barn owl nest. So we moved pretty quickly to say, like, we can't use this equipment. What can we do instead? Also, can we maybe limit activity around the nest and just give person space? We didn't even know she was there. I mean, they're nocturnal. So, and we hadn't used this equipment yet that year. So next slide. Of the 6 eggs, 5 were viable and hatched, and they banded the owlets on August 24th, and they found that the female was also banded, but they could never breed the male. So we never figured out where mom was from, but she was banded. And at least the 5 that hatched on Poplar, hopefully we think.
Is this an eviction day?
This is barn owls talking about birds pooping on you. That's their defense. You pick them up and it was bad. It was bad. Like down the arms, it was bad. Next slide. So this year, that you can't nest in the excavator anymore, so we put a nest box up on January 11th, and by February 2nd, she had already moved in and was on eggs. So immediately moved in to the nest box, and that way we could use the equipment too. So everybody kind of won. And it was not a banded female, so it's a different bird than the one that nested last summer. And she also, that pair also had 2 broods this year. So started nesting in January. I think they fledged by May, and by June she was back on the second set of eggs, also fledged. Next slide. Then we found another pair trying to nest in a different excavator that was actively being used. There they are, and we put up another box for them. We moved the eggs over, it didn't take. We moved the box somewhere else. Immediately they moved in. And then next slide. 4 of the 5 hatched, and we got to band them as well. So we had 3 successful barn owl birds on site this year, and brand new as of last summer. So we are protecting the owls. I was a little nervous because they really like the terns out on Poplar Island, and a barn owl could eat a tern, but we haven't found any tern wings or heads or bands or anything in the nest. We just found like rodent material and maybe like red-winged blackbirds as prey as of now. So we're hoping that the barn owls don't start eating the terns. I don't know what would happen if they would take the one box down, but the terns are all the way up here, and the more productive barn owl pairs down here. So next slide. New highlights from this year, the short-eared owls, the ones where I clap and they pop up, they nested this year for the first time ever. Fish and Wildlife found a nest, and it's The fourth nest in Maryland has ever been discovered for short-eared owl, and the first one where the chicks were abandoned. So, total surprise. The other one, American avocet, is really graceful shorebird. Tried to nest on Hart Miller in the 80s, but it failed. I don't know what happened, but they tried to nest again. And it was right before a really heavy rain, and the nest got washed out. So they tried, it didn't work, it wasn't our fault, so that's, one plus, but it just didn't work because it got flooded by that.
So is the short-eared owl nesting in the grass?
Of course. With the Spartina patents, the high marsh, the taller, so underneath the tussocks, you just like pull it back and there's a nest. So they wouldn't let anybody out there without them. We know where the nest is. If anyone else tries to find it, you'll step on it. So they took us to the spot, they pulled back, and then we documented with pictures, because they only had cell phones, I think, when they found it, so we wanted to get more documentation, and then we just let them go. Next slide. Another one, spoonbill. There was another spoonbill invasion this year from Florida or wherever. What I heard was there was a drought down there pretty early in the season, and a lot of the Florida water birds just dispersed. All young birds. So I guess the adults had their territories and they weren't letting go, and then the young birds just had to. Spoonbills. This is a Florida, Texas, Central American bird. They were in Ontario. They really dispersed, but we've never had one in the county before. I actually watched it fly in from off the bay back in June, and it hung out through the end of August. And right there in front of you, you could just go right up to it. No one has seen it since. Hopefully, it's on its way back south, but maybe it just went somewhere else. That was my favorite find this year. Next slide. And then, like I said, the birding tours, Kristina, who facilitated this but isn't here, is your contact person for them. She normally does 1 to 2 a month from April through October. You leave Naps and Arrows in Tillman at 9 o'clock, and she has you back at 1 o'clock. So it's about 3 hours and 20 minutes out on the island. Stop here, look at these birds, stop here, normally 3 stops. They can only take 24 because that's how many life jackets are on the boat. That's like the capacity for them. She's got a whole system with like a mailing list and prioritizing visitors. Sometimes she does some pop-up tours for brand new visitors who've never been there or been on a birding tour, just to keep it kind of an even playing field. Next slide. Last slide, actually. eBird is, oh wait, sorry, let's go back one more. Last slide with content. eBird is like the place to log bird sightings online. It's just a database anybody can join, and you just plot where your list is from, and you make your bird list, and it shows up on a map, and anybody can see it. You can hide it if you don't want people to see it. Sometimes with the sensitive species, we do that. But there are hotspots, and out of over 1,800 hotspots in Maryland, Poplar is number 19 for total species. My other 3 sites are a little bit higher, but they also have forest. So Poplar doesn't have woods yet. I think once our trees mature, we'll be in the top 10, if not top 5, but that's a long time. They're gonna plant in
27.
We're not gonna start planting trees until 2027. So those trees need to turn into forest for a whole different community of birds to move in. But in the meantime, we are tracking it, and top 20 out of over 1,800, I think, is pretty good. You'll notice that Poplar for eBird, it says there are 261 species. My list has 257. Anyone can join eBird and report what they want. And people are wrong sometimes, and that's okay. But there were a few on eBird where I just didn't want to put them on the official list if someone couldn't provide a photo. Kind of like, in the nicest way, I think you got that one wrong. So we're going to stick with 257 for the total, but there is that little discrepancy. And I think that's all I have. Next slide is just contact. Yeah, so If you want to go birding at Hot Streak or Hart Miller, that's my list. If you want to go birding at Poplar, Poplar Tours at MENG is Kristina and now Bronwyn.
Someone, Kristina.
Mostly.
Kristina's a mastermind.
Okay.
Unfortunately, sick that one.
And just general questions, that's just my work email for anything. Questions?
Yes, I have two questions. Number one is, have you seen any brown pelicans?
Brown pelicans are annual and kind of hard to pin down. I'll go out there and there's 20, and then 2 weeks later, none. And then, 2 weeks after that, there are 5 over here. There's really no consistency to them except more in the warmer weather than the winter. But I have it in the winter.
How about breeding of raptors?
We have at least 25 active osprey nests on site. This was a bad year for osprey in the bay as a whole. I think we only had 2 produce young this year, but that was consistent with most of the mid and lower bay.
Why was that?
I heard menhaden shortage, but that's what I heard.
What was that?
Menhaden, like fish, that's their primary like feeder fish in summer. But again, like that's what I heard from the internet, so I don't know if that's been scientifically analyzed. But most of the time, we have over 25 osprey nests, and they produce about 3 to 4 young, maybe 2 to 4 young each. Multiple bald eagle pairs on Coach's Island. 1 bald eagle pair that tries to nest everywhere in active construction zones and never succeeds, but just builds its nest on a tree next to an excavator. Like they just can't figure it out. But the other ones can, and they produce young. And then I see Cooper's hawk and red-shouldered hawk on Coach's flying. They have to be breeding out there. I just wouldn't know. So.
Any short fins?
No, migrant. Anybody?
Is the heron rookery still viable?
Oh, yeah. They all fledged. I don't know how many you will see next week on the tour. They get in around early April, and by early July start dispersing. By late July, mass exodus. Early August, like 1 or 2 nests left. The glossy iris are gone already. But the snowy egrets stick around and should be out there still.
How about the pelicans?
Breeding or in general?
General.
I had one earlier maybe July, there were 1 or 2 out there. But like I said, one day I'll be out there and there's 20 or 30, another time none, then 5, then 1 flying past and not staying. Really unpredictable with them.
You don't want to find a pelican next unless you want to fight.
Oh, okay.
They're down in Florida. They would put warning signs around them,
Oh, okay.
like say, is this so we don't disturb the birds? Is it, no, that's so you don't get attacked.
Yeah.
They will take on.
Yeah, we do not have nesting pelicans yet. Nothing would surprise me, but I think the big colonies are farther south, like Somerset County.
That's right, and they nest in colonies,
Yeah.
right? So you don't get attacked by 1 bird or 2 birds. You may get a
It's-
couple, like
it's-
6 or 8.
Yeah. Yeah.
An army. So, do you want to tell people what to expect next week?
Yeah, so next week, if you are on the birding tour, you will meet me at my base with one of my other coworkers. We always recommend just getting there at 8:45, it does leave at 9 a.m. sharp. We just take that time to go get life jackets on, go any safety procedures before getting on the boat. Once we get to the island, basically, we just get right to it. We hop on the bus, like you said. There's certain spots where the birds are, and basically we just follow the birds. Really self-paced, it's really up to you guys where to go. Usually there are spots where they are more likely to be, which we do know about, and Tim and my coworker Kristina know about those, but yeah. And your tour is from 9 to 12, so we'll be getting outside around 9:30, We'll be departing around 11:30 to have you back to Tillman.
And what should they bring?
We usually, people bring scopes or binoculars. You're more than welcome to bring in snacks and water. It's really self-paced. But yeah, the bugs aren't too bad this time of year. In my opinion, no.
Mosquitoes?
There is certain times of the year, but mainly we are up on the road, so we're not, trekking many wetlands or anything. No promises, because I'm gonna say that now, and then tomorrow I'm gonna get 50 mosquito bites. But at least at the moment, the past couple of weeks, they've not been bad. In the spring, we had really bad biting flies, they would bite your cheeks. But so far, the bugs are pretty.
Remember, wear closed-toed shoes.
Oh, yes, please. Please wear closed-toed shoes, so I don't have to. So you're not really, but. Yeah, so we have a land base at our Tillman dock.
It's the first left after you go over the bridge. And don't go into the left that's parking lot. You're gonna take the first left that's a street. Oh. And then you'll see a sign on the left-hand side of the road once you get there, and it will say, Poplar Island Tour. And there you'll park right there. There'll already be cars there because the workers have already come and parked and gone over earlier. So just park and find your way to the water, basically. And there'll probably be a pretty good group of you, because we have 24 signed up. If anyone cancels at the last minute, I'll put the word out through Chesapeake Forum to the people on the wait list. And then they'll, whoever picks it up first will be one going at that point.
Yeah, so if you email public@nenv.com, I can always send you directions to our site. We have them all spelled out, and that's also an option if you guys are curious. But usually once you go after the Tillman Bridge, there is a little tackle shop, but you make a left on the Chicken Point Road. Our land-based building is a house, but like she said, there's that public tour parking, gravel lot on the dock. You'll just head towards the water, and then me and whoever else is running for that day will be there to greet you.
And the directions are on the memo that you'll get for, I think did we schedule it for the morning or the night before?
I believe the initial memo goes out 2 days in advance and then the morning of.
So around 7 in the morning, you'll see a memo that has those directions.
Also, it's a birding tour, so if there's anything that gets called out that you didn't get on, just ask. Make sure that you see everything. You know, if you can't figure out which one it is, Wayne Bell is leading and he's great. Don't be afraid to say, oh, I can't find that one, I want to see that one, because that's the point.
Yeah, the same thing with stops. The tour is really self-paced and up to you guys, so.
It's okay to hold the group up a little bit to see what you want.
Yeah, because usually if you have a question, other people do too. Yeah. So don't be shy. Especially with those birds that are some minute. Oh, that wing tip goes this far.
Yeah, those spots, I'd say on average, we're there for about an hour and a half.
Are you gonna be there, Jeff?
I won't be, I will probably be on site next week, not on the trip, but I'm going to kind of map out where things are.
He's our scout.
Yeah,
Is there- Are there 2 trips next Wednesday? Because I thought we were going at 12.
No,
There is
it's
just
10,
one.
it's 10 9 until 12.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And then there is another trip going in the beginning of October that their trip last spring was canceled because of work that had to be done on the boat. So they're already.
So what time are we supposed to be there?
8:45.
9.
Yeah, but Tim will be there in spirit. He's always there in
I'll let
spirit.
you know where to look. Yeah.
Yes. Do you have his cell phone number?
Yeah, call me.
I do now, I got it this morning.
Good. So any more questions? That's a great debrief for our trip. Thank you so much.